Okay, so somebody requested that I should check out this video by joshscorcher, top 15 worst consoles. I've seen enough angry video game nerd episodes to know where I've seen enough to know about bad consoles and such. Funny thing to note, I've actually seen one of Josh Scorcher's videos before, and that's the animated video with Sephiroth after his introduction in Super Smash Bros. It's not SFM animated, I think it's Blender animated, I don't know. He lended his voice to this Final Fantasy VI villain, this clown character, about how Sephiroth is more popular even though he's a one-dimensional flip. At least it's a cool one-dimensional flip. And I've seen another one of his videos where he makes the comparison between the clown and Sephiroth, and the clown wins by most points. One of them being that Sephiroth was trying to destroy the villain throughout the entire Final Fantasy VII game, while the clown, he already destroyed a planet. Well, I don't know what to say other than sorry if you prefer sorry that the clown doesn't have that much attention and love, like how Superman doesn't have that much love and attention, even though Batman does. Batman and Sephiroth, they have the love and attention, while the clown and the Superman, they don't get that much love and such. Oh my gosh, freaking scam calls. Okay, so top 15 worst consoles. This is 42 minutes long. Gosh darn. One more thing before we start. I guess the clown may have done some of the most powerful shit ever. But I guess Sephiroth's more popular because of his presence. And the fact that he has one of the best songs ever. Anyways, let's move on. Fiery Joker Productions.
Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. Currently, these are the three core console manufacturers. Since the early 2000s, their battle has defined generations of consoles. With them being household names, it's easy to forget that there have been plenty of other contenders in the ring. I wouldn't blame you for not knowing about a lot of these, considering how short-lived they were. Of course, there's more to a console than just bad games, since having bad games doesn't make a console automatically terrible. There are several more factors. Before we get into the metrics which we'll be measuring these by, a few ground rules. 1. No knockoffs or bootlegs. These have to be officially licensed and sold. 2. Cloud gaming services are allowed if they have consoles that don't require PCs. 3. No plug-and-play consoles. They're way too easy to mock and don't really count in my eyes.
Okay.
As for the criteria, oh boy, take a seat. 1. Bad and or limited library of games. Consoles are kind of pointless without them after all. 2. Overpriced console or games. And yes, we will be adjusting for inflation. A lot. 3. Bad and or deceptive marketing. Marketing is far from easy. As you'll see though, some people really try hard to suck at it. 4. Bad hardware. Pretty self-explanatory. Bonus points for bad controllers. 5. Bad business practices like corruption and such. Once again, pretty self-explanatory. 6. Lack of standard features for the time. Lack of backwards compatibility, bad online if offered, etc. 7. Bad production. Not a bad thing by itself, but when it results in a thing like this, well, yeah. 8. Bad gimmicks. If it doesn't contribute to the overall experience, if it feels tacked on, it becomes a factor.
Got it memorized?
Before we get started on this roller coaster of history, I want you to pay special attention to adjusting for inflation, because you really do begin to realize how much your parents sacrificed all their hard-earned money. If they unfortunately bought you one of these consoles, be sure to tell them how much you appreciate them.
So, lie to your parents about how much you appreciate a bad console? I never... All I could say is... I know my grandma occasionally gets me something and either I get bored 24/7 or I'm just not interested. Eventually she stopped buying things for me. Thank goodness. Number 15.
Say what you will about Nintendo, but back then they've always been consistent with their production goals. They may not milk the console scene as much as Sega did, but with what few platforms they had, they made the most out of it. Of course, for every hit system, there's gotta be that curveball that threw them for a loop. Enter Virtual Boy, Nintendo's dinosaur age headset console, advertised with the eye-catching gimmick of experiencing games in 3D. Now, to its credit, the Virtual Boy does have some good games. A few decent platformers, puzzle games, and even some first-person games that take advantage of the virtual reality concept. Here's the problem, though. Most of these games hardly make use of the console's gimmick of experiencing virtual reality. Instead, it often capitalizes on depth gimmicks to give us an illusion of 3D, even though these can be done on any other console and still look the same. So really, all you get for playing these games on this system specifically is a migraine and a half. Yeah, get used to all those crimson pixels because they're not leaving your irises. To make matters worse, only a handful of the games were released in North America, with half of the entire library unlocalized and a few more canceled due to the console's failure. Given that it's sold for $175, with an adjustment for inflation at $315, why fork your wallet for this mess when you could just buy a Game Boy? Talk about self-competition.
Yikes.
Dominance! Not a chance. My mind stronger than you.
If I had $1 for every dated product that promoted fake 3D, I'd have enough to buy 8 double cheeseburgers. Which is a lot, but just not as much as I expected. It goes without saying that this is Nintendo's worst performing console, hardly lasting for a year with only 770,000 units sold. On the bright side, while it failed the virtual reality scene, it did pave a way for the bigger and better headset consoles that we have today.
Oh.
Even Nintendo ain't ashamed to reference this little fella every so often. I really can't be too mean to this console. It tried to do something new for its time, and while it didn't do it well, it's mostly pretty harmless. Well, except for the eyes. And let's be fair here, for all of the console's kinks, it didn't really hurt anyone enough to warrant a lawsuit, unlike the N64.
I was gonna ask, did it? I was gonna ask if the Virtual Boy caused people to go to hospitals or caused really bad damages to the eyes, and I've heard that there's no lawsuits, unlike the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 caused lawsuits or something? I don't know. It's kind of surprising because I've heard that a few of the games they have has a pretty good record, except for Superman 64. Number 14.
On the first day of Christmas, RCA gave to me a telephone? A keyboard? No, seriously, what is this thing? Actually, it's one of the very first consoles to play ROM cartridges, the RCA Studio 2, aka RCA's attempt at outgunning the console that got away. Created in 1977, back when video games were still blossoming, this barely managed to survive for only a year. Its biggest competitors were ColecoVision and Television and the Atari 2600. And
No, not the fake!
it didn't stand a chance.
Wow.
It only sold around 60,000 units. Compare that to the PS3's 87.3 million, and you
Oh,
really
wow.
get a sense of the scope. So what happened? How did the RCA fall short at the finish line? Its going price back then was $149, which, thanks to inflation, measures up to about $657 nowadays.
Oh
but
my
was
gosh.
it worth the price? Not really. Unlike other consoles, it didn't have color, which really hurt its stand in the market. And it didn't even have a joystick. Instead, it just had number keypads for controls on the console. Not that they helped, considering how unplayable most of its library was.
Sorry.
Looking back, it's kind of weird picking on this one since it came out during a time where standards weren't really high for gaming. Then again, you look a little deeper and see how it did everything wrong. It tried to one-up its competition only to fall flat, and it feels even more dated than it was supposed to. But hey, it did bring us something amazing. Joyce Weisbecker, the console creator's daughter, learned how to program the device and became the first lady commercial game designer. Not bad, Boomer. Gosh, I feel dirty saying that.
I have never heard of that. And wow, it has many bad advantages. No color, barely any games, and also just numbers that act like keyboards or controllers or something. What?
You strap this console onto your head and look into the screen. Within is another dimension. A dimension of empty ideas, stiff animations, and nauseating visuals. You're moving into a world that makes you question why you even trusted Tiger Electronics to make a worthwhile product to begin with. You just crossed over into the RZone.
A Twilight Zone parody. I've never heard of this console, but you know what? If anybody has reviewed this console and they don't make this joke, well, I don't know what to say.
This gimmicky little gadget was Tiger Electronics' attempt to compete with Nintendo on the VR scene back in 1995. It even has its own brand of scorching red, eye-frying games. Except this time, instead of wearing it like a headset, you strap it on like a visor. An obvious move to cash in on style points 20 years early.
Wear Google Glass without looking like a dweeb. Okay, maybe not.
Then there's the controller. Man, is this thing ugly. The buttons are stiff, and it's got so many menu options that it's easy to confuse them and press the wrong one. Good thing the off button is close by, though, because that's clearly the most important one here. And the games? It's the same juvenile LCD gameplay you get with a Happy Meal, aka every other Tiger game. There's no 3D, no use of VR, nothing. The immersion gimmick is completely pointless, so much they made a handheld version of the game to amend that. Granted, it handles better, but they're still improving over burnt garbage. The RZone is no more than a glorified accessory that squeezes itself in between the console market for a quick buck. Granted, it's cheap enough to last a couple years, but there's still no novelty to be had here. The LCD graphics aren't charming anymore, even in Tiger's prime. Nintendo may have had its days with the Game & Watch, but even they knew when to leave the scene. Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer that anything made by Tiger at the time hardly warrants professional judgment. It feels a bit redundant to pick on this company, really, especially since they didn't charge much for this thing. But if you're gonna put yourself in the same market as Nintendo and Sega and claim you can hang with the big boys, then the scorn that comes with it is all on you. Okay, whose idea was it to make a phone into a gaming device? In 2003?
Oh.
Yeah, now I got your attention. I don't...
Well, you can play games on mobile devices now. Because we have advanced technology. But we're not looking into that. We're looking at 2003. Okay.
Really know what spurred Nokia to get into the gaming game, but it didn't really work out well for them. They were one of the top mobile phone developers at the time, and because the game Snake was preloaded onto most of their phones, they became one of the first pioneers of mobile gaming.
Oh, it's that one thing.
Too bad when it came time to create a console that appealed to adults and to defeat the kid-centric Game Boy Advance. Seriously, that was their ideology. They would sink at the first hurdle with the Ngage. Here's the first problem. They made the buttons the same as a normal mobile phone at the time. And anyone my age or older knows that those buttons barely worked for a phone, never mind a game console. Second, battery life made an iPhone's battery look like a nuclear power plant. And the third and most prevalent and important problem,
Sonic N?
it looked utterly ridiculous using this to take calls because of the mic placement. Even though it was 2003, years before viral mockery hit the mainstream, the internet memed pretty hard on this side-talking taco. Now, while you won't get gas from eating this thing, it does make you queasy thinking about Nokia's marketing. Like I mentioned, they thought it would be an alternative to the kid-friendly Game Boy Advance and SP, but it didn't make a splash. So much so that Nokia completely mixed up the shipping and selling numbers. They shipped 400,000 copies and only sold 6,000, but they told everyone they sold 400,000 and later admitted that they were wrong. Gotta love it. Now, I will give Nokia some credit. The Ngage QD they released in 2004 was a massive improvement that made the device more user-friendly and sold it at a lower price. Plus, they had 2 successful games with Pocket Kingdom, Own the World, and Pathway to Glory. But even with those boons, the Ngage was already gasping for air by the release, and in 2006, it was discontinued. While the Ngage was an interesting device and had a good concept behind it, it was just too early for a game phone hybrid console when the Game Boy Advance and later the PSP and DS just blew them out of the water. Nowadays, mobile gaming is so big that it's suffocating to a degree, but back then, it just wasn't enough to engage audiences.
You know what? I'll kill my co-writers later. Bigger fish to fry.
You'll kill your coworkers later? Also, I looked at the graphics in these 2003 mobile games. They're not really that bad for the time. But, yeah, judging from the control schemes and stuff, it looks like it would have been a pain in the ass to play. Number 11.
Okay, guys, I gotta be honest. The name of this one is really fun to say.
New one.
Can you say it normally?
And that's about the only good thing I can say about it.
At first, no one even knew what the Nuon was.
Nuon?
It was kept under tight wraps and just called Project X, and was advertised as the true contender against the other next big consoles.
Mario
What did we
killer.
actually get? A DVD player that could play certain games. Wow! What a unique and revolutionary concept at the time! Except when the PlayStation 2 came out the same year and did it too. And guess which one came out on top?
No, the other guy, the one in the hat. Hey, I have a hat.
Yeah, VM Lab's ambitious little science project didn't stand a chance against Sony's juggernaut. But why? Well, for starters, it had a really limited library with only 8 games and 4 movies to its name. At least half of those games were either ports or rip-offs, and the movies were titles that no one would ever ask for, such as the essential Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. I'm disappointed for you. Also, just look at the price. Originally selling for $499, which would make it $774 after inflation. Now compare it to the PS2, which could also play DVDs and had a humongous library, and ask yourself, why would I pay $200 more for a console that offers less?
$299.
Double kill.
Turns out, a lot of consumers asked that same question, hence why the Nuon only lasted about 3 more years before it was discontinued, just after VM Lab's closure. Kind of a shame, it had a few decent games, it wasn't really broken, but that's a circle of progress, unfortunately.
Still, bummer to say.
Yeah, one loses, PlayStation wins. Go Jack and Dexter, go
Okay,
Crash
the next console
Bandicoot.
is the Pippin.
Pippin? Thought we were done with musical theater.
No, Bandai created a console called the Pippin.
So, nothing to do with the musical.
Gosh, I hope not.
You know how Nintendo and Philips worked together to make a console? Well, Apple and Bandai Namco did the same thing back in the 90s, and theirs was almost as bad? Pretty bad.
Apple and Bandu Namkai or Namkai Bandu. I forgot.
The Pippin, or the Pippin Atmark or
Pippin
Atworld,
Atmark
had to have dumber names before Square Enix. Whatever you want to call them, these were originally released in Japan and worldwide in 1996. And it was honestly pretty dead on arrival. For one, its price point was $599 US. in 1996,
No.
which is more than $1,000 today. And for those lucky Americans who did have $600 in 1996, the most they got for games were sucky education games. Europe was even worse since it only got one game while Japan got all the good ones. Well, decent ones, mostly being the occasional Gundam, Dragon Ball, and whatever weird properties Bandai had at the time. Even with those decent games, though, the Pippin only sold 42,000 units and was discontinued in 1997, a year later. And that's pretty much it. It was a failed console from the beginning and didn't last long at all. Though I can also make fun of its controller called the Applejack. Okay, I don't know if I want to make a pony joke, a cereal joke, or even a boomerang joke since it looks like a boomerang hit a Game Boy. I guess I could go into more specifics about the confused hardware choices and the apparent internal confusion about whether or not it was supposed to be a game console or a computer, but we got other stuff to get to. So yeah, the Pippin is not only a bad console, it isn't even that noteworthy either. The most respect I can give it is sending it off with the Lord of the Rings meme.
Fool of a took. Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
I think they should be thrown into an e-recycling place. They should be e-recycled.
Around the tail end of 2019, Google offered to the world an experience known simply as Stadia. A cloud gaming system that boasted a whole library of games to play on your TV and smart devices without the bulkiness of your regular console. Gamers were excited, especially Twitch streamers. At last, the world welcomed Stadia with open arms and...
This sucks more than anything that has ever sucked before.
It bombed. Big time. This absolutely terrible launch really highlighted Google's poor marketing. It barely explained how to get the Stadia working properly, and instead, all we got was this really bizarre, misleading commercial that kinda dunks too much on other console gaming options. And that's not even getting into the controversies with streamers. Not only did you have to jump through more hoops than usual to get it working, but get this. The creative director for Google Stadia, Alex Hutchinson, said that people who stream video games, and I quote, should be paying the developers and publishers of the games they stream.
You're an idiot.
Surrounding circumstances aside, let's look at the system itself.
Okay.
That library of titles, really limited, and you have to buy them from the Stadia store on top of the $10 a month for the system. And that's barely worth the price since you can't play it properly without a strong enough internet connection. And the graphics are barely up to snuff, especially if you want to try and stream it. Heck, this thing didn't even have a search bar until 9 months after launch. Google did not have a search bar. And notice Google refuses to publish their official sales numbers. Makes it kinda sus if you ask me. If I had to make an educated guess, I'd have to say as of May 2021, around 2 million. Look, I get what they're trying to do. Make cloud gaming more popular. We've seen this attempted before with services like OnLive or PlayStation Now, but it seemed more like OnLive walked off so that the Stadia could run and then trip on its face. Seriously, why would anyone want a convenient and spacious console that barely works when the bulky consoles like the Switch or PS5 actually function? And the most surprising part of all, at the time of this video, the Stadia is still alive.
I'm not dead.
Well, he will be soon. He's very ill.
Yeah, Google, who have a history of murdering a lot of their products that aren't profitable, is actually keeping Stadia alive. That very strongly suggests it's still making them money. It might not make sense, but we probably just don't have all the info. Like with Fallout 76, you'd think that all these controversies, obvious problems, and core fundamental issues would be a money sink, but the evidence is clear. People are still playing and enjoying it. Who knows? Maybe this means they'll get better over time. After all, the PS3 proved it can be done. It's too soon to tell, so we'll just have to see if the Stadia can be saved. Or if Google will, once again, pull the plug.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no. I think I'll just stick to my PlayStation games and, of course, my gaming laptops. Thank you! And, of course, my PlayStation 2 over there. which I have not played for over a year. Probably.
In this day and age of 4K gaming, the bit wars seem almost quaint by comparison. It can be easy to take for granted just how big the leap from 8 to 16 was. So when the Jaguar proclaimed itself
Atari Jaguar
64-bit, it was a pretty big deal. Was it truly 64-bit? Well, the answer is debatable. Some claimed it wasn't actually 64-bit, just two 32-bit processors working in parallel. One thing's for sure, Atari was so confident in it, they made it into a slogan. As for the games, there were a lot of issues. While there were some worth playing, most of them weren't. This is due to a lack of third-party support, which was due to the games being difficult to program. Though, good luck trying to play any of them with this monstrosity of a controller. Atari's really bad at those now that I think about it. On a side note, the Jaguar really got screwed when it came to overseas markets. It took Atari forever to release it to all of Europe. Germany didn't get it immediately, and Spain got it 2 years later, on April 1st.
Not joking. No pun intended.
Of course, Europe was downright lucky compared to Australia. In
Australia?
1993, USD to Australia was around 1.5. If there were no tariffs, it would be 375 Australian dollars. But there were tariffs, and they raised it by an additional 325 Australian dollars. In 1993, for Americans, that would have been a $217 tariff. Adjusted for inflation, that's basically paying $401 extra for a garbage excuse of a console. Did I do the math, Atari?
Nobody said the remark.
On top of all that, we have the CD add-on. Throughout gaming history, console add-ons have seen mixed results, especially when you try to give an add-on to an already struggling console. Given the Jaguar wasn't that great of a system, I'm pretty sure you can figure out how this went. Toilet jokes aside, the Jaguar CD was a mess. Due to a cavalcade of hardware issues, mostly coming from the processors, trying to get one of these to work was an endeavor. Not that there was really much point, given that there were somehow even fewer games on it. Bottom line, the Jaguar failed at nearly every turn. It was intended to bring Atari into the modern era. Sadly, all it did was just toss it into the toilet.
Another AVGN did
I don't
this.
think I'm being controversial when I say EA is like a plague upon the gaming industry. And much like a plague, they somehow managed to spread everywhere. Too soon. Anyways, much like Sega or Atari, EA was once in the business of making consoles. Sort of. The founder of EA, Trip Hawkins, stepped down as EA CEO, and the 3DO was created through a child company, the aptly named 3DO Company.
3DO.
However, Hawkins was still serving as EA chair at the time. Does that count as this being EA's console? Well, as long as I get a pick on EA, I'm saying yes. So, what's so bad about the 3DO that gets it on this list?
The 3DO.
Well, it'd be easier to list what isn't wrong. Point the first, bad console design. Let's face it, humans are vain creatures, and aesthetics can and do make a difference. The 3DO looks like an ancient VHS player. I know people joke about calling the Xbox Series X a brick, but this is just ridiculous. Point the second, price. Yeah, you know how you can get a brand new PS5 with a disc player that will set you back about $500 or so? Assuming you could get one? A brand new 3DO was asking $700 in 1993. Adjusting for inflation, that's a little over $1,300. Yeah, I don't know what they were smoking either. Point the third, marketing. Did you know the 3DO is actually 9 different consoles produced by 4 different manufacturers? And that each 3DO's availability was determined based on your location? And that each 3DO had different specs? No? Me neither, until everyone in the writing team did research for this entry. There was also a promised online function that never came to be. The only redeeming feature of this mess of marketing is that none of the consoles were region locked or had copy protection. Of course, that also made it much easier for hackers to homebrew the 3DOs to high heaven, but it could have been much worse. Point the fourth, hardware. You know, for a time, the hardware on the 3DO that the world was presented, the Panasonic FZ1, was actually pretty advanced. However, this doesn't save it from some absolutely boneheaded choices. You know how PS2 only has 2 controller ports, but you can get splitters you can put into the ports so you can have up to 8 people playing? Well, someone on the 3DO team thought it would be a good idea to have a single controller port and then have additional controllers connect directly to the first controller. Point the fifth, games library. A console can be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but there's nothing to play on it, then it's just a lump of plastic. Unfortunately for the 3DO, it launched with only a single game, and its library didn't expand in leaps and bounds from there. The console has a pathetically shallow pool of exclusives, and even its list of ported games isn't exactly the Marianas Trench of possibility. Adding on a liberal license policy that allowed games like Plumbers Don't Wear Ties to exist and be sold on the thing, there really wasn't much reason to have this console. Ultimately, the 3DO was a misguided concept from the start. From a troubled production to some baffling choices in hardware and a couple gimmicks that were pretty worthless, the 3DO just faded into obscurity almost as soon as it was born. R.I.P. 3DO.
3DO, I am not amused with you, 3DO.
Sega consoles, boy are we in for a treat. While Nintendo is actually doing the smart thing and making good games for their systems, Sega thought they could outplay the competition by making lots and lots of consoles. It's no surprise that most of them blew out their lifespan due to a lack of good games, and the worst offender of that goes to the CD and 32X add-ons. The Sega CD is supposed to be Sega's way of taking a step forward with game consoles, with games running via discs instead of cartridges. While it's not a bad direction, since consoles afterwards did adapt to it, it still runs the issue of complicating the Sega Genesis by being an add-on that doesn't provide you with many worthwhile games. Most of its library is just FMV games with choppy visuals and non-existent gameplay. Even with the few games that hold up, is it really
like
worth
Sonic
paying for
CD?
a console this expensive? Especially when its tech doesn't even age that well
I
anymore?
barely played that game.
Not really. Oh, but that's just scratching the surface. Following up is the 32X, yet another console extension with barely any good games to show. What it does have to show is a million power adapters to plug in just to get it to work. Oh, and guess what? It costs a lot too. So add this alongside the Sega CD on top of games made to be exclusively played with both add-ons, and you're paying over $550 worth of console price with an inflation of over $970. That's like paying $800 for two separate 360 plus add-ons nowadays. Adding insult to injury, 32X is what the US gets as their exclusive console when Japan already has a martial artist beating them over the head. So while the US has to wait 6 months for Saturn, all they can do is build an iron lung for the Genesis and watch it slowly get crushed under its own weight.
Man, we were chipped.
First time.
And it didn't stop there either. There's even the canceled system Neptune, which was originally planned to be a standalone console for 32X.
Oh?
A little confusing, given that 32X was originally codenamed Project Mars, and oh gosh, this is getting a little hard to follow. Looking at what Sega did to their classic console was depressing. The whole thing was one miserable decision after another that ultimately led to the company's financial crisis and pulled it out of the console scene entirely. At least it does serve as a cautionary tale for future console markets to focus on the importance of user-friendly products. Yeah, the attempts at gimmicks are still there, but man, could they have done much worse.
Another console the AVGN reported.
The Atari 2600 was a legendary titan among classic gaming and arguably one of the pioneers of mainstream gaming. While it was still going strong, Atari had the idea to try and one-up their own child with the 5200, which boasted better graphics and controller function than its predecessor. Instead, the 5200 fell flat. What really didn't...
Hang on a minute. The 5200? I think they have a great video game review that... Sorry, I gotta look this up. Okay, Atari 5200. Oh, yes, he did. I remember now. There were two things I remember at the moment. It has its own pocket or something that James placed the beer bottle in, and the controls do not work.
Help was that it came out during the video game crash of 1983. Yeah, remember that? Where the gaming industry took a financial downturn thanks to really, really bad games?
Oh. A video game crash?
The real issues came from the console itself. For starters, look at this thing. It's enormous and bulky. It looks more like a fax machine than a gaming console. Don't get me started on the controller. It was incredibly fragile, really uncomfortable to handle, and it looked more like an old school cell phone with a pause button?
All my life, leading up to this moment, has been worth it. Every last second. I am truly blessed.
Okay, joking aside, the pause button was a genuinely new thing at the time, so that's one good thing about this controller.
Oh.
Out of literally nothing else. Other than that, there were also...
A pause... That's where the pause button originated? And that's what paved this way for the future? Talk about great things having a rocky start. Am I right?
Complaints about how the 5200's games were just enhanced versions of its predecessor's titles, and it couldn't play the actual games without an adapter. While it didn't have heavy competition, only going up against Intellivision and ColecoVision, it only managed barely over 1 million sales at $269 for at least 2 years. On the plus side, the outdated 2600 continued to thrive until the 90s, and Atari was a lot more careful with the 7800. With
7800.
actual backward compatibility, while the 5200 is just a product of bad timing, little effort, and really confusing design choices.
The 7800 apparently learns from the 5200. So that's good. And unlike the PlayStation 4, it has backwards compatibility.
We've talked about a couple handheld consoles on this list, but
Yes.
what happens if we talk about a console that was an Android console, but not handheld? Yes, I am sane. Yes, what I'm talking about is real. Yes, I will get to the point and talk about the Ouya. The Ouya was an Android micro console released originally in 2013 after a successful Kickstarter campaign
Never heard of
that
it.
raised over $8 million in 2012. Unfortunately, like a good number of Kickstarter campaigns, what was promised and what was given were two different realities. The console on its own was honestly not that bad. It worked for the most part, but there were some issues. Those being poor connectability with the internet.
Oh, no.
A subpar controller with input lag. Oh no. And a poor performance of mobile games compared to when played on mobile.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, what?
Mobile games compared to when a subpar controller with input lag. Oh no. And a poor performance of mobile games compared to when played on mobile.
So mobile games once better by comparison?
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, those three things are all very important items needed to make a good console. The other thing needed was games, which the Ouya was pretty light on to begin with. To balance that, Ouya Incorporated created the Free the Games Fund, which helped budding developers with funding by matching indie crowdfunding campaigns up to $50,000 as long as the game was Ouya exclusive for the first 6 months. But that didn't do much when the first 2 games successful with this program had reports of people artificially inflating their campaigns to gain additional funding from Ouya. Because, of course, whenever someone tries to help the little guy, people always try to find a way to abuse it. While Ouya did fix these issues with the fund, it didn't help their gaming catalog that much. So despite the Kickstarter, the console itself only sold 200,000 units and was deemed a commercial failure. In 2015, the console itself was discontinued and its assets and staff were sold to Razer, who eventually killed the Ouya completely in 2019. This is kind
What
of
a waste
unfortunate
of
since
money
the
and
Ouya
time.
actually had a good premise with a way to make gaming accessible and cheap, and that anyone can make a game for the system without a license. Kind of like Steam Greenlight, or the Atari 2600, or the 3DO. Okay, maybe not that good. Nevertheless, when compared to the juggernauts that were the big 3 console developers and how mobile gaming was already starting to get way better with the release of the iPad and Android tablets, there was no reason to choose a home console that played mobile games worse than a portable phone that was better in performance and accessibility.
What a waste of time
When it comes
and
to
money.
dedicated handheld gaming, Nintendo is the undisputed king of the market. While some territories do better than others, as a whole, their reign has remained unbroken. So whenever a new competitor tries to enter the market, it usually doesn't go over so well. And nowhere is this more evident than with the ill-fated Gizmondo. Originally
Gizmondo.
conceived as the game track by Tiger Telematics,
No relation.
Gizmondo was hyped to hell and back with plenty of promotions and secondary features. As for the games, there were a grand total of 14 of them. And with such
14?
games as Sticky Balls and Mama Can I Mow the Lawn, it's not hard to see why this thing bombed. The Gizmondo launched with a price of $400. For that, you could have easily gotten a PSP or DS with some games. Keep in mind, this was a handheld in 2005. There was a less expensive version that came with built-in advertisements.
I mean, on one hand, I'm appalled that a console with built-in advertisements was even considered. On the other hand, I'm betting some exec is looking at this and going,
Write that down, write that down!
The servers that were supposed to play said ads were never activated, so... Whoops. There's also the fact that the CEO, Stefan Eriksson, was linked to the Swedish mafia, further destroying this console's already terrible reputation. All these factors led to the Gizmondo
Connected
being
to the
discontinued
mafia.
after less than a year, taking the manufacturer with it, and being the worst-selling handheld console.
in hindsight, I'm really not surprised that this thing failed. It used the same narration as B-Movie.
According to all principles, it's too heavy for its wings. It just can't fly. But no one has told this to the bumblebee. So it flies and flies. He doesn't care much about principles, do you?
You like jazz?
Number 2.
Given how the licensed Nintendo properties on the CDI practically birthed a new art form, it's easy to forget that there was an actual console there. Sometimes Philips did the same. The CDI was definitely an interesting experiment. For starters, it was marketed as a multimedia system first, game system second. Gee, why does that sound familiar? As a game system, the CDI was... well, bad. Let's get the obvious thing out of the way first. The second controller port was on the back of the console. That's the kind of design flaw so blatant you swear it was done for the sake of it. And the controllers themselves were bizarrely designed. If you thought the N64 controllers were designed for alien hands, these seem to be designed for Lovecraftian horrors, one for each ultimate god.
What the hell did they do to that
Controller.
While most of them were wireless and the wireless worked very well for something from 1994, none of them were conducive for gaming, especially with D-pads and joysticks that had little in the way of solid grip. A more dedicated gaming controller came out much later, but why would anyone want it at that point? For being one of the first CD-based consoles, the CDI had little to offer in terms of games. Most of them were limited to interactive museum tours or edutainment games. Of course, you can't talk about the CDI without mentioning the infamy that was the licensed Nintendo games. We've all seen the parodies. We've all seen the memes. So I'll sum it up like this. There's a very good reason Nintendo refuses to acknowledge these things.
It really makes you wonder why the creator bothered to take down the fan remake. Apparently it was because they were afraid of a cease and desist. You do realize that Nintendo would have to acknowledge that these games were made if that was the case, right?
The interesting thing about the CDI is that while it didn't do so well as an actual game console, it was still used in other ways, mainly as, well, a CD player. There were even classes of CDIs designed for use as presentation hardware, so it's common to see businesses utilizing one of these. Heck, it was one of the first consoles to have online capabilities. They were far from stellar, but it was definitely bold for the time. In the end, the CDI, while it did find a home in other formats, it was a pretty sucky game console. It was a nice beefy piece of hardware for the time, but it couldn't decide what it wanted to do or be. It tried to do everything, but excelled at none of it, which is far more than I can say for number 1.
Okay, the worst video game console ever. What is it? Oh, there's honorable mentions? Okay.
Steambox. Wasn't great, but hard to say it ripped people off more than others on this list. PlayStation 3. One of the worst console launches and marketing campaigns severely damaged Sony's reputation. Took forever for it to recover. Vanilla Xbox One. Recovered faster than the PS3.
The PlayStation 3? I seem to have a pretty good time with the PlayStation 3 during my childhood. I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
But Still, that launch though. Phantom. Can't really call it a failure if it's never released, but still worth mentioning. Wii U. Confused marketing ruined a potentially innovative console. Tapwave Zodiac.
The Wii U is considered a failure, huh? It's kind of funny considering it has a few iconic games like Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U and of course Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which I have an emulator for, and it's currently playing the Relics of the Past mod. Yeah. Oh, right, I should probably mention something. I heard that the shop in the Wii U is gonna go down soon. So if any of you guys are watching this now, if any of you are Wii U lovers, you better get this. You better buy some stuff at the Wii U shop before it goes down. You better do it now while you have the chance, or soon while you have the money.
Great hardware and good games hindered by lack of funds. PlayStation Vita. Great hardware and support by Sony hindered by lack of games.
PlayStation Vita. I never got that. I had the PSP before I somehow lost it. But that's really it. I missed the PSP, but we got emulators and stuff for this nowadays, and of course playing it on the laptop and playing movies on mobile devices, so it's not really that big of a deal anymore. But what's criminal about the PlayStation Vita is that it has an Uncharted game that's a prequel to the first Uncharted movie. Like, I played all the Uncharted games except for this particular one that came out for the PlayStation Vita. I hope an emulator comes out for this soon. I really want to play that Uncharted game. This is criminal.
Gamecom, bleeding edge tech at an affordable price, hindered by abysmal reputation and lack of games. Hyperscan, AVGN tears into this proto loot box e-reader better than I ever could.
Hyperscan.
Number 1.
We should file.
And of course you have to play an ad to make the suspense come up even more and more. Okay, number 1. What do we got?
This is it. The worst console of all time. Worse than the Stadia. Worse than the 5200. Worse than the Gizmondo. And worse than the dreaded CDI. Now, let us glimpse into what I have deemed the worst console of all time.
Do not be fooled by its commonplace VCR appearance. Strap in.
What?
This is the Laser Active. It was Pioneer's answer to the console that,
Laser
at
Active?
the time, was what they thought their greatest competition was.
Oh my god, the CD is
Philips
big.
CDI. If you think that's funny, well, I hope you have a taste for the dark and or absurdist kind of humor, because otherwise we might see Twitter get it canceled. Remember how expensive the 3DO and Pippin were? Well, this was way worse. The base console on release was $900 in 1993.
Why?
You heard me? I said base. Because for some reason, incomprehensible to even Cthulhu, this console decided to take a page out of Sega's book by adding a bunch of add-ons to the console. Called modules, these pieces of hardware allowed you to play games for the TurboGrafx-16 and Sega's Genesis and CD. Oh yeah, did I say take a page out of their book? I meant literally working with them to replicate their crappy add-ons for Pioneer's even crappier console. And they were $600 a piece in 1994. And if that's good enough for you to make this the worst console, I'm not done. There were even more module add-ons. There was a module that cost $350 that allowed you to play karaoke games. Compare that to the Guitar Hero World Tour bundle, which had a game and a full band set that cost $189 in 2008. There was even a module that let you play floppy disks and supported Mac OS, so the Pippin's here too. But wait, there's more. They even created a 3D goggles module to allow for playing 3D supported games and work with the Sega Master System. And the adapter to use these goggles were sold separately. I swear this sounds really familiar. So not only did this thing use features from 4 other entries from this list and do them all worse, but also sold them at the price of a modern day mid-range gaming PC. Yep, I haven't even talked about the games yet. Most of the games are just quick-time event games that required the modules to actually work. And the games cost $120 a piece. Remember how many people were mad about games costing $60 or $70 today? Yeah, you've seen nothing. Well, you probably think with such a high price point for both the games and the console and not much to offer, it wouldn't sell well. And it didn't. Most places say that it only sold 10,000 units, but unfortunately, there isn't a verified source that gives us an actual number. That speaks a lot when a console failed so hard that we don't even know how little it sold. Well, luckily for everyone, the Laser Active was discontinued in 1996. I think Pokemon, since that came out in the same year. With all of these issues, poor pricing, poor design, and a bad gaming catalog, the Laser Active is my choice for the worst console ever. And I'm so glad it isn't active anymore.
I'm the Fiery Joker, and I'm glad I never had to spend any money on these bad consoles. I just wish I could spend money on a good one.
God!
Wow! Laser Active. I've never heard of that, but oh my gosh. That it costs a lot of money to buy, and $120 to buy one single game? What the fuck? And most of the games are apparently quick time events. And this came out in the 90s. Did the Angry Video Game Nerd tackle this? I'm looking it up. No, he didn't. What in the holy heck did I just witness? Okay, I'll admit, some parts of the video is very boring, while some other parts, especially the number 1, were just baffling. And I'm honestly surprised Stadia is still going strong. I have never played it. I've never checked it out. I have no interest in it because I am a PlayStation guy. Thank you very much. Some of these consoles, the Angry Video Game Nerd has pretty much gone over, but while some of the other ones, I have not heard. And sheesh. Say what you want about a few corporations, but in comparison with some of the guys that are trying to offload the Nintendo, Sega, and all these other companies, charging more money than usual, you have to rethink it a little bit. $120 for a game and probably $60 or to $100 or something dollars for different stuff to plug in for the Laser Active? Really? Screw you. I'm tired of just watching this. I think I'm just gonna end it right here. I am so tired from watching this. Some parts of the video is just tiring to watch, while some other parts were just baffling to me. Especially the money they priced. In comparison with PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo, which are cheap by comparison. It's $60 a game. I have no problems with. $40. Honestly, I don't think I have that much problems with paying $40 or $60 for a game. Unless it's complete trash. But oh my gosh. And they referenced the Steam controller. But apparently they stopped selling it because it was shit. I mean, I could just use other controllers, like either a PlayStation 3 USB controller, if I configure it, considering that these types of controllers don't really work unless you modify it to an Xbox controller for some reason. Like, what the heck? Xbox gets love, but PlayStation doesn't? Screw you. I don't even know. I think I'm going to stop right here. If you like what you see, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. And for those of you who requested this video, I hope you enjoyed this reaction. Have a good day or night and take care. Oh my gosh, $120 for a single game? Really?